So friends, welcome to the ongoing Donald Trump Pam Bondi reality show that I guess could be titled The Epstein Files. What you're seeing them do right now is all for show. As Attorney General, Pam Bondi has every reason to know every single word contained in the Jeffrey Epstein grand jury transcripts. And frankly, those transcripts only make up a very small fraction of the Epstein files. And friends, if Pam Bondi knew those transcripts contained evidence, information, testimony that incriminated Donald Trump, do you think that, first of all, Donald Trump would be demanding their release? And second, would Pam Bondi be filing a motion with a judge in New York seeking their release? Really? Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. Okay, friends, let's expose the absurdity of what Donald Trump and Pam Bondi are doing in their desperate attempt to keep Donald Trump's supporters, his MAGA base, from fleeing and turning on him, which it looks like they are doing in droves over his flip-flop on whether he will or won't release the Epstein files. Let's talk about why this, alleged big reveal of the Jeffrey Epstein grand jury transcripts, the testimony, why it is complete and utter nonsense. None of it will implicate or incriminate Donald Trump if it is even ordered released by the judge. And let's talk about why that is. But first, let me talk a little bit about what I'm doing over on Substack. And I do this just by way of an invitation. If you like the content here on my YouTube channel, these Daily Justice Matters videos, I would invite you to come on over to Substack. It's completely free. I don't put anything behind a paywall. And what I do over there each night, pretty much every night between 8 and 9 p.m., I try to send out some advance notice of what time I'll be doing it live. I try to do 10, 12, 15 minutes breaking down the hot legal issue of the day, and it's completely unscripted. It's a little bit more irreverent. I probably drop the occasional F-bomb over there on Substack, which I rarely do here on my YouTube channel. And if you're interested in that kind of content, that kind of program or presentation, I went over to Substack when I left MSNBC because I just wanted to be 100% independent all the time. If you're interested, come on over and check it out on Substack. You can hit subscribe. It's free. There's a way you can support me over there, but you don't have to get any of my content because I put nothing behind a paywall. Okay, friends, let's briefly touch on the new reporting. This from CNN. Headline, DOJ moves to release grand jury testimony in Epstein case. And that article begins, the Trump administration's chaotic handling of the so-called Jeffrey Epstein files continued Friday as the Justice Department asked a federal judge to make public years-old grand jury testimony made behind closed doors against the convicted sex offender. In its filing, the department justified releasing the heretofore secret evidence as a matter of public interest. And friends, what's really interesting is the motion that was filed with the judge in New York is signed by two people, Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche. No actual DOJ line attorney, the people who go into court day in and day out and actually present cases on behalf of the American people. No, just signed by two political types, two former lawyers for Donald Trump himself, Bondi and Blanche. And here's a quote from that court filing. Quote, the public's interest in the Epstein matter has remained. Given this long-standing and legitimate interest, the government, the DOJ, now moves to unseal grand jury transcripts associated with Epstein, the filing reads. The department also filed a similar motion in the case against Epstein's associate, Ghislaine Maxwell. President Donald Trump called for and Attorney General Pam Bondi agreed to file the motion Thursday night as the administration faced increasing backlash over its botched handling of the Epstein files. Bondi has long promised to release as many documents in the Department of Justice's possession as possible, but walked that promise back in a memo last week, announcing that there is no evidence Epstein kept a client list or was murdered. The decision to move forward with releasing the grand jury now lies with a federal judge. Before making the ruling on the matter, the judge must consult with the victims and any uncharged person discussed in the testimony, as their identities are protected under federal law. Depending on what timeline is set, that process could take weeks, months, or longer to unfold. The grand jury testimony, however, is only a small portion of the thousands of documents related to the Epstein investigation and criminal case, many of which are already in Justice Department custody and may not have been presented to the grand jury. All right, friends, now let's dig into this idiotic reality show, being put on by Donald Trump and Pam Bondi, trying to, convince Donald Trump's base, at least those in his base, gullible enough to believe any of this nonsense, that all of a sudden he's being transparent and he will reveal all about the Epstein files. Nothing could be further from the truth. So let's unpack Pam Bondi's bullshit. And the best way to do this, friends, is to talk about how we federal prosecutors go about investigating and indicting cases, because that will make clear that Pam Bondi's assertion that we're going to ask the judge to release the Jeffrey Epstein transcripts, the testimony of the witnesses who appeared before the grand jury in the Epstein investigation, we're going to ask the judge to release it all. All will be revealed. Nothing of consequence will be revealed for a couple of reasons. First, the grand jury transcripts, only a small fraction of the evidence amassed during the Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell criminal investigations and prosecution. And, so if you really wanted to know who was in it up to their necks, you would have to release all of the files, all of the videotapes, the DVDs, which we've seen some reporting about, titled, young girl's name plus client's name, and we don't know what those names are. We don't know what the evidence is because Pam Bondi doesn't intend to release any of that. But that's the incriminating stuff, right? The client list, the DVDs, the phone records, the cell site information, the photographs, the evidence obtained courtesy of search warrants. None of that is in the grand jury transcripts. But even more fundamentally, friends, as a career federal prosecutor, here's how I indicted a case, and here's how all federal prosecutors go about indicting a case. We open a grand jury investigation and we begin issuing grand jury subpoenas on behalf of the grand jury. Subpoenas are virtually court orders, and the person who receives a subpoena is legally obligated to appear before the grand jury and testify. We also use grand jury subpoenas to obtain documents and phone records and social media account information and banking records and videos, surveillance and DVDs and audio recordings, all sorts of stuff. And that would become the file in the investigation and in the case. But here is what is most important to know, because it knocks down Pam Bondi's nonsense. Once we're done investigating before the grand jury, the federal prosecutors have to go to work and produce what is called a case impression memo, a CIM, or some U.S. attorneys' offices call it a prosecution memo, a pros memo. And let me tell you what that looks like, friends. That is a soup to nuts account of every single shred of evidence that we acquired during the course of the grand jury investigation. So for example, there will, and these things can span 50 pages, 75 pages, more than 100 pages. I'm not going to say that producing this, it was like a book or a novella each time you were preparing to indict a case. I'm not going to say it was the bane of my existence, but it wasn't my favorite part of the job, sitting behind a keyboard typing out a 100-page CIM, case impression memo, meticulously detailing every single shred of evidence, not only detailing it, listing it, documenting it, but analyzing it. Does each piece of evidence incriminate the defendant or not? Does it exculpate? You know, would it help the defense in defending the defendant against criminal charges? If so, the Constitution requires that we give it to the defense. They have a right to exculpatory material. That's the Brady case, the Supreme Court case. But we have to meticulously detail and document it all, analyze it all. We have to write up, you know, basically it's like a script of the case. It's like an all-inclusive opening statement. Here is everything, and here's how we're going to, you know, present it to a jury, and here's why we believe all of the evidence in aggregate gives us a reasonable likelihood of success on the merits. That's a fancy catchphrase that we use at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Only if we believe that we have proof beyond a reasonable doubt that would lead a jury to convict, vote guilty, may we proceed to trial. That's our standard. We have to analyze the admissibility of each piece of evidence. I mean, this thing is so detailed and dense, and it's a soup to nuts account of all of the evidence in, for example, the Epstein case or the Maxwell case. Not only that, friends, every single witness who appears before the grand jury, we have to write a long summary of their testimony. And we will attach a transcript of their testimony, which is, you know, all-inclusive, but we write a summary detailing all of the important evidence, the good, the bad, the indifferent, the ugly, all of it. And then we package all of this up before we ask the grand jury to vote. And then we sit down with our supervisory chain. And we talk through the investigation, we talk through the evidence, we talk through our theory of why we believe certain charges should be brought because they're supported by the evidence. And then the supervisory chain has to review it all and sign off on the indictment, on the charges that the line prosecutor is proposing, asking the grand jury to vote on. I was chief of homicide for years. I was deputy chief for a number of years. I was a line attorney for a number of years. I've been through this process countless times. And as chief of homicide, I was the one actually approving the murder indictments that were being brought every day in the courts of Washington, D.C. So I lived and breathed the process that I'm describing to you. The reason I just took a lot of time to describe it to you, you can tell this is unscripted, it's just me rambling about the life I lived as a career prosecutor, is because Pam Bondi has every reason to know every word spoken by every witness who testified before the grand jury. She knows it. She's been briefed on it. She's had these transcripts available for years because they belong to the Department of Justice, right? The case was investigated in New York, but it's available to the folks in the Department of Justice who have a need to know, to be privy to this information. So it's not a mystery about what evidence is contained in the grand jury transcripts in the Epstein and Maxwell cases, which, again, just a small fraction, because you don't present all witnesses to the grand jury, small fraction of the Epstein files. And friends, boiled down to its essence, if Pam Bondi knows every word in every grand jury transcript, and any of it incriminated Donald Trump, do you really think she would have briefed up Donald Trump and said, hey, Mr. President, there's a bunch of bad stuff about you in the Epstein grand jury transcripts. What do you want to do? And Donald Trump would say, I demand they be released. Really? I mean, friends, isn't the far more likely scenario that once Pam Bondi knew everything that was contained in those transcripts and she briefed Donald Trump on the fact that, you're good, Mr. President. Nothing in there is going to incriminate you or implicate you or come back to bite you. That's when, Donald Trump with his little fingers posted, release the transcripts, and Pam Bondi filed the motion seeking the release of those transcripts. Isn't that the far more likely scenario? But friends, there's something else that we should keep in mind that cuts against anything in those transcripts incriminating Donald Trump. Who was it that investigated and indicted Jeffrey Epstein in 2019? That would have been Bill Barr's Department of Justice during the first Trump administration. Who was it that investigated in the grand jury and indicted Ghislaine Maxwell in 2020? Also Bill Barr's Department of Justice, his DOJ attorneys. Friends, come on. If there was information that began to implicate Donald Trump that was coming into the Department of Justice when Bill Barr was the Attorney General, do you think Bill Barr would have directed his DOJ lawyers, okay, now I want you to really drill down on the stuff that incriminates the president, Donald Trump, my boss, okay? I want you to document it. I want you to get those witnesses and put them in the grand jury so they can testify under oath, sworn testimony about Donald Trump's wrongdoing so we can preserve it and it can be used to prosecute Donald Trump in the future. Do you really think that's the advice Bill Barr would have given to his DOJ lawyers? So that's another reason that I don't expect there will be anything incriminating in the grand jury transcripts that Donald Trump and Pam Bondi are now offering up to Trump's MAGA base if the judge signs the order releasing the transcripts, and that is not a sure thing, given that the rules don't really provide expressly that this is a good reason to release them. But this is what they want to offer up to Donald Trump's MAGA base to say, look, nothing here. Come on, don't fall for it. We won't fall for it. And let's get the word out to our friends, to our family, to our neighbors, to our, acquaintances, our coworkers, to people who might be in a position where they're either unable or unwilling to figure out what's really going on here, that this is nothing more than a Trump Bondi bad reality show, the Epstein files. People need truthful, honest, accurate information about what the hell's going on inside the Trump administration. Because justice matters. And friends, thank you for bearing with me through this unscripted, longer than usual, somewhat rambling Justice Matters video. If you like this kind of presentation, I would invite you again to come on over to Substack, where I jump on live every night, talk directly to you, try to answer some questions as they pop up. And, I go for 10, 12, 15 minutes talking about the legal issue of the day in a more casual, less structured, sort of more irreverent way. And you can come on over to Substack. It's always free. You just hit subscribe to my Substack page and you don't have to pay anything. Nothing behind a paywall. You can support me over on Substack, but you don't have to get my content. And while I'm thinking of it, I'm kind of the world's worst YouTuber because I never do ask folks during my Justice Matters video, hey, please hit subscribe on YouTube while you're here. Always free. It costs nothing, and it does help. So friends, as always, please stay safe. Please stay tuned. And I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.